I'm delighted to be here on Voices of Rio with the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of Rio Grande Community College, Kent Halley. Kent and I have worked together for the last 2 years. We're actively budgeting now for the fiscal year 2017 fiscal year, and one thing that I thought would be interesting to our viewers is the funding formula in Ohio. As some of you know, I came here from a University of New Mexico branch campus, and in New Mexico we were moving 5% a year toward completion dynamics. In Ohio, we went whole hog to a outcomes funding formula. And so I've asked Kent Halley to be here to explain the funding formula, and also both specifically and also at a general level philosophically. Ohio, like every state in the country, believes it's in the public's best interest to have a system of higher education and to make that system accessible to citizens. And then how we budget, how our state share of instruction funding formula is, should incentivize desirable behavior and should make more difficult behavior that is considered to be not productive toward those specific ends. So welcome, Kent, and thank you for making time in your day.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay. Do you want to, just for a minute or two, share a little bit about your past? I know you're a Gallipolis native, and
yeah, I am from Gallia County. I grew up about 5 miles from here in Rodney, and I have lived in Gallia County almost my whole life. And I have some experience working for the Auditor of State before I came to Rio Grande. And I've been at Rio now for about 2.5 years, working with the community college for about 1.5 years as the CFO.
Okay, great. And like I said, what we have here in Ohio is a state funding formula that specifically focuses on course completion, program completions, and also has some areas of incentive.
That's right. The funding formula was revised a few years ago. The governor charged the higher education, the public higher education administrators in the state to develop a totally performance-based funding model. And they had a commission, and the commission came up with this model, and we went to it. The first full year of being on the 100% performance-based was last fiscal year 15, and that's what we're doing now. About $5.7 million of Rio Grande's revenues this year is from the performance-based funding, and the good news for Rio is that our formula our SSI amount has gone up by about $1 million over the last 2 years. So we have done well with the subsidy in recent years.
Right, and that is largely because some of the success points, we have an at-risk population here.
Right.
I know for most of our students, and we seem to do well in some of the intermediate completion milestones, but I don't want to get ahead of us in terms of some of the charts that we have.
Yeah, you want to bring up the chart number 7,
okay,
which shows how it's broken down.
So
yeah,
that's great.
That's
that's
chart 7. That chart shows the whole pie. It's $438 million that the state has appropriated for this fiscal year for the funding, and you can see half of that is based on course completions. When a student completes a course successfully, they have to pass. Another 25% is completion milestones, and that's when they hit either 12, 24, or 36 credit hours, or if they successfully complete a Dev Ed course and then enroll in a college level course. So those 3 major parts of the pie comprise the total $438 million.
So, and again, those completion milestones at 12, 24, and 36 credits is a way of incentivizing the institution to make certain that the students hit each of those milestones, as well as the fact, and a lot of us, I don't know, it's a sad joke and it probably shouldn't be repeated, but here I go. You hear, like, if a woman gets divorced beyond the age of 37, she has a better chance of being hit by lightning than getting remarried. I've heard that's true. I don't know whether that's true. And we have something similar in higher ed. That is, if you have the old 3 levels of remediation, 098, 099, 100, and then you start getting credit at 101, something like 7% of the students nationwide make it through 3 levels of remediation. So even though at times we used to test students and say, oh, you need 3 terms of remediation, those courses don't go toward graduation. They often eat up a student's financial aid so that they use up their financial aid and they're still not getting close to a credential. So what we have done in our English program is what we call an accelerated learning program, that you never go more than 1 level of remediation in our Dev Ed English, even though we used to have 3. And by doing that, you take a regular mainstream course, you take a second course that's supplemental instruction for that course to ensure that you're successful at it. And then ideally at the end of 1 term, you have completed 1 remedial course, but also 1 regular course, and you're now able to take courses throughout the curriculum. So ideally, that's a desirable thing. Also, some of the other incentivizers in the program, and Kent, correct me or help me with this a little bit, we also acknowledge for the fact of Pell eligible anytime during a person's lifetime. That also creates an intensifier.
Right. There's 4 main access categories, and they are when a student qualifies for any of these access categories. Rio Grande and all community colleges get additional funding when they actually complete. So the first category is adult students. That's students that are over the age of 25 at the time of enrollment. Low-income students, and as Dr. Sax was just saying, that's students who are Pell eligible. Minority students are also eligible, and academically unprepared students, which are those students who enroll in a Dev Ed course before they begin their college level courses. So if a student has any of these access factors, they are eligible for additional funding.
And also non-traditional by age as well.
Non-traditional, yes, over the age of 25.
25 and over.
They are. So we get additional funding whenever those students actually complete. We don't get, one important thing to note is we don't get any funding for students enrolling. We only get funding when a student actually completes the course.
Right. And what CFO Halley has just mentioned, this is an output or outcomes formula rather than an input formula. I think if you go back 10, certainly 20 years across the country, everything's an input formula. And at state systems, we would get repaid depending on the number of square footage that you had in classrooms, the number of students you had on the 15th day. Again, these are inputs, they're not outcomes. And Ohio is one of the few states that's already gone 100% outcome. Just to complicate this a little bit more, again, we're not compensated at the same rate for all areas. There are 3 major areas. There's an arts and humanities area with 4 different levels. There's business, education, and social sciences with 4 different levels. And then, of course, there's STEM with 5 different levels: science, technology, engineering, math, and medical. So you've got essentially 4 plus 4 plus 5, or 13 different levels of reimbursement. And what this does, and again, I want the citizens of Ohio to realize this, is that we'll get repaid obviously at an arts and humanities level 4, much higher than an arts and humanities 1, but we'll get repaid at a higher level for a STEM section at level 4 and 5 than we will for anything else. So again, on the one hand, you have to offer courses that your students want to take. At the same time, the state is trying to make some accommodation to realize that a course that has labs and expensive equipment may cost more than one that just has a talking head like me as an English professor in a classroom with very little media and equipment.
That's right. In fact, our nursing and allied health programs have been very successful with the funding formula. About 1/4 of our total funding is derived from nursing and allied health because of the heavy weight towards those STEM classes.
Good. What kinds of trends do you see? I know you and I attend a joint CAO, Chief Academic Officer, CFO, Chief Financial Officer meeting every year together. But the rest of the year, you guys are meeting on your own, and we're meeting on our own. I know I would argue that there's some academic trends we see in the state, increased amount of dual enrollment because of CCP, again, going toward a completion model rather than an input model. What kinds of funding trends do you see?
Well, one thing I've noticed in looking at this formula, even in the last few weeks that I've looked at it, is one of the things that's helped Rio is that we have increased our funding while the rest of the state has kind of dropped off. And the way that works is the state appropriates a set dollar amount. The $438 million is set. So if we do well and all the other schools in the state, or some of the schools in the state, do worse than they had it previously, our funding might actually go up. And if you could go to slide number 3 there, Mike, you can see how over the last 5 years or so, actually, fiscal year 2012 to fiscal year 13, the funding went down. But part of what caused that was during that time, overall state enrollment dropped significantly from about fiscal year 10 to present. Fiscal year, statewide enrollment in community colleges peaked at about 200,000 students. Now it's down to about 160,000. Fortunately for Rio, we had mostly minor increases in enrollment during that time, so our share of the subsidy went up. And even when it has decreased, it hasn't decreased as much as the statewide enrollment decrease. So our formula has actually gone up as a result of other schools dropping enrollment. So that's one interesting thing to note as far as trends.
Yeah, and we saw in a previous chart, $438 million a year being afforded to the community colleges. Our share of that is $5.7 million, which is about 1.2%, 1.3% of the total. We have only 1.1% of the community college students.
Right.
So we're doing slightly better than you would think for the number of students we have. So we should be happy with that. But again, we do have a lot of low-income Pell-eligible students. We do have academically unprepared students, and those things help our state share of instruction.
Yes, that is correct.
And again, that then has ramifications for the entire institution. What do you do when 60% of your students are coming in needing remediation, and the kinds of support services you have to create for that? Okay. Are there other charts from Kent's PowerPoint that we have not shared yet with the audience?
Yeah, the number I think that chart is very interesting there. That shows the total statewide community college pie, so to speak, and each one of those grayed out slices represents a community college in the state. And you can see some of the bigger slices are Cuyahoga and Columbus State and Sinclair, and then you can see Rio there in the red. And we have, as Dr. Sax said, a little over 1% share of the pie, 5.7 million. So that really is a good graphic to show our share of the pie statewide.
I think that graphic too, without even seeing the names of the schools, I can tell you who the 4, 5, or 6 big schools are. The ones you mentioned, plus Lorain County Community College, maybe Owens Tech in Toledo. And one thing I've often felt, because I'll meet people as I travel nationally, or I'll go to a family wedding out of town. People will find out I'm a college professor, and they'll say something like, "Oh, the average professor at Harvard makes $132,000 or something like that. You guys are all, you know, high on the hog." And I'll be like, "Nobody on my campus makes that kind of money except the president." You know, like, no, we're not anywhere close to that. And so, even though I've been an English professor, and a professor at Harvard or at Yale or at Berkeley is also an English professor, they have a totally different life than we have here. You know, they're not teaching 4 or 5 classes per term. They don't have lots of advisees. So it's a different kind of life. And I would argue that even though there's 23 community colleges and we follow the same guidelines, the 4 or 5 or 6 huge community colleges and the 16 or 17 smaller ones are really almost like 2 separate categories too, because of the of just the economies of scale that you can have at a school of 11, 12, 15, 20,000 that you can't have at something like an Edison or a Rio or a Washington State that's, you know, much smaller than that.
That's right. And since those schools are so large, when their enrollments increase and when their completions increase, it has a bigger effect on the whole statewide pie, and can just a little uptick with one of those larger schools can affect the amount of state subsidy that we here at Rio get.
Right. And it's been interesting for me these last 2 years attending monthly community college CAO meetings in Columbus, because presumably we're all colleagues and we're sharing best practices, but at the same time, especially with the institutions that border your institution, you're competing for some of the same students. I mean, you know, Lawrence County students can go to Shawnee State, they can go to Southern State, they can come to us. You know, Pike County, Ross, Pickaway, even Jackson County students, again, can go to OU Chillicothe. They have other options in the community college, in the branch campuses in the 4 years. And I know legislators in every state want to avoid redundancy. When I was in the state system of Colorado, we would have legislators in Colorado who actually said, "There's an English major at CU Boulder. We don't need to repeat that across. You know, if you want to major in English, you can come to CU Boulder." And we'd argue, no, we're 330 miles away from Boulder, and for mountain passes, that's not reasonable for people on the western slope to do that. But again, I can understand that politicians, they have fiduciary oversight, and they're concerned about certain, they don't want redundancies. But it's an interesting point. Obviously, I think most of us would say you need an English major, you know, you need a math major, you need a biology major on just about every campus. But then we get into other areas like what we have here, an associate's program in fine woodworking. I think we would all agree we don't need to repeat that at all 23 community colleges. And people can actually say, I need to get to Rio Grande to take this course, or I need to get to the Jackson Center to take medical coding or whatever else it is. And so it's an interesting dynamic that politicians are making decisions, but they're not educators. And I think sometimes they listen to us. I kind of feel like sometimes they don't. I don't know if you're getting that same vibe from the CFO side of things.
Well, you know, there's a lot of state initiatives that are kind of complicating things somewhat, although they're good initiatives like College Credit Plus. And speaking of the competition, you know, there's colleges all across the state competing for students right here in Southeast Ohio through online programs and such. So that's one initiative that, as the way College Credit Plus is currently structured, that may go against some of those more efficiency models, because if we're having students that are in our district enrolling in a school district on the other side of the state, like you say, that's not necessarily very efficient.
Right. And you know, we're very supportive of College Credit Plus. We went from 122 PSEO students last year to 252 unduplicated headcount for CCP this year. So obviously we bought into the program. But when I've talked to Chancellor Carey, when I've talked to Representative Smith and other people in Columbus, I think there's some unintended consequences from CCP. And I think even once I bring that to their attention, they're not sure how to address them or if they can't address them. For example, in my experience, AP programs are some of the best things that a public high school can offer. I think especially in small town and rural areas, where if you're a brainiac or a nerd, you often don't have common cause with other students, because as much as I love high school football and, you know, drinking beer and eating smoked meats, that's not all there is to education or your life. And what I see happening now is that the pass rates for AP programs are so low that we have students in our area taking AP courses junior year, senior year, not getting credit for the AP, not getting credit because they get a 1 or a 2 on the AP exam. And what the school districts now are saying, you mean my kid can take a Comp 1 and get 3 credits in 1 term? Why should they bother with AP? So one unintended consequence of CCP that, again, when I've mentioned it to statewide leaders, they go, wow, I didn't think of that. I guess that could happen. But I don't see them addressing it, is that CCP could kill small high school AP programs. Why would you do it? Because you can do CCP with much less risk than a commitment to AP. So, and the other thing, of course, is in the CCP funding model, the funding is diverted from the districts to the colleges, right, at a very, very modest rate, but it's still money that the school districts aren't getting. So again, we're all ideally looking out for Ohio students pre-K through grade 20, but at the same time, I kind of feel like it's like car dealerships. Like, I'm a Chevy dealership, you're a Chevy dealership. We want to sell you a Chevy, but you can go to either place. You live halfway between your dealership and mine. You know, a Chevy's a Chevy, and you know, we're limited in terms of how we can deal with that. And I kind of feel like it's almost the same kind of problem here. We want to do things in the student's best interest, but at time the rules kind of get in the way of that almost.
Yeah.
Okay, have we been through all of those wonderful?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been through them all.
Okay. And again, this goes back to our original slide. You can see $17.2 million in the RGCC revenue stream. We've got about $7 million, I believe, in the URG stream, so our overall budget's around $24 million, and you can see of the $17 million, only about a third of our funding comes through the SSI, about 4/9 of the funding through tuition and fees, and then there's a number of other possibilities. I think compared to other state schools I've worked at in Colorado and New Mexico, getting just 4% from the local property tax is minuscule. And generally, I'm used to having my institution collect more than that. I think actually our property tax rate hasn't changed in decades. Is that?
That's correct.
Is that
1 mil?
Okay.
Still at 1 mil.
Wow.
And that's based on 1974 values. Yeah, and the other thing that makes us unique on that chart, that pie chart there, is that we have auxiliary revenues, which are room and board charges. Most other community colleges don't have that. So about 3.2 million or so of our revenues this year will come from room and board charges. That makes us somewhat unique as well.
Right. Although one thing I will say from going to national conferences, I've been surprised the number of traditional community colleges, not the kind of conglomerate institution we are with a public community college and a private residential university, but there are actually public community colleges as close as, am I going to get this right, Allegheny College of Maryland, which is just like by Hagerstown, south of south central Pennsylvania. They're building dorms. They're building dorms on their community college campus. And I see that happening here and there across the country. The idea being is that if you're on campus and you have food service, that takes out 30% of your time, right? Dealing with your apartment, grocery shopping, things like that. and retention and completion rates are much higher with residential students. So you've noted that it brings in another revenue stream to the college, and I want to add to that point, if students can work it out to live on campus, even married students or mothers with children can live in married family housing or live on campus, it will increase their retention and completion rates, which are positive things as well. Okay. Any final comments for the viewing audience for us?
I don't think so. Like I said, the College Credit Plus program, Rio has a lot to be grateful for in that, as we've increased our revenue pretty significantly with the new funding formula over the last few years, and that's a good positive thing for Rio. It speaks well of the staff and faculty here who have done a good job in this outcomes-based funding environment.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sax.
You always bring accurate information, and you're thoughtful and reflective, and I really appreciate that in a colleague.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, and thanks for watching. Again, Richard Sax, I'm happy to have spoken this afternoon with Kent Halley, CFO of Rio Grande Community College, and we bid you goodbye from Rio Grande, Ohio.